Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Rose City Politics. It is October the 13th. Our regular panel tonight includes Doug Sartori, Pat Papadeus, and myself, John Lidke. Doug, Pat, how are you both doing tonight? We'll start with you, Doug.
Doing just fine. Where's Merrifield?
Doing something bigger, better, more important, smoking a cigar and probably just drinking some whiskey.
We'll try to go on without him.
He finally cracked the 43-year-old bottle. Forgot about the show entirely. No, he just gave us a heads up. Pat, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Are we going to be able to get through this without Don? Do you think?
Who's going to be in charge of the dirty jokes?
Well, we're all going to each have to do our part. I'll try to stand up to attention for it.
Good one.
All right. I think you just self-nominated there,
Yeah,
John.
you're it.
Self-nominated. That sounds familiar too. Anyways, let's get right into this. Please do support us at patreon.com/Rose City Politics. I will do the teeniest of teases right now. No substance to it, but we are working on a bit of a special Rose City Politics treat for our Patreons, doing a inside dive into something that we talked about ad nauseum for quite a few months ago. So you're going to want to stay tuned to that. Now would be a great time for you to head over to patreon.com/Rose City Politics to make sure that you are there for the first tidbits when it does get out, though. We are also in BizX Magazine and online at bizxmagazine.com. We have a new column that will be coming out in their next month's issue. It's the big issue. It's the BizX Awards issue. Contractually obligated to mention that. And we will be writing about the Festival Plaza. We were going to be talking about the Plaza, but now I guess we're probably going to be writing a little bit about how it's now been deferred down a little bit pending a new report. So check us out there. Check us out on all of your favorite social media and podcasting apps. And we have been able to broadcast live on tape thanks to the kind support of LiUNA 625, building better communities throughout this entire pandemic, and Rose City Politics always wants to thank them. Now, we have a banger of a show tonight. Up first, not a surprise for any listeners of the show, we will be diving into the news out of the downtown mission done. We are seeing the executive director leaving Windsor and heading out east. We'll then be diving into online city council ward meetings, the resumption of them, no more telephone town hall shenanigans. And then we'll be talking about first responders and mandatory vaccines. And if we have time, we will get to Lakeshore and possible regional transit. Might flip those two around. Who knows? We'll find out, but we'll dive right into this one. Mission done. Downtown Missions Dunn has announced his resignation. Very proud of that. Came up with that headline myself there. Ron Dunn, the executive director of the Downtown Mission, is stepping down after 9 years. On Friday, November 5th, he has taken a job as the CEO of Halifax's Hospice. The Mission Board will appoint an ED in the interim and strike a search committee. This will be the fourth executive director in 49 years for the Downtown Mission. Dunn became interim CEO in 2012, CEO in 2015 after having served stints on the board. We've talked about the mission finances before. This is all well known. Really, they ballooned under Ron Dunn's leadership, expanding in ways that had never been done before, adding new services such as dental clinics, hair salons, podcasting studios, and t-shirt companies, a youth hub and a deli and a gym. Many in the community questioned if the expenses were necessary. They saw their staffing levels tripled by 2018, and for the first time in 18 and 19, they saw deficits for the first time. 600,000 in 2018, 755,000 in 2019. So, that's a brief snapshot right now as to where things stand. We're going to, we'll spend some time talking about, the issue at the library and the new mission, but let's just, take the pause right now to assess what it means for the mission to be losing Ron Dunn at the helm. What does it mean do you both think about, relations with the community, with the neighborhood, with the city writ large and leadership? It's been it's been very contemptuous. I think from multiple parties. I think there's going to be a lot of relief, I would imagine, with this resignation here. Not to be too curt about it, but obviously, I mean, we know Ward 3 Councillor Reno Bordelin, friend of the show, very close friend of the show, he had said publicly to not support the mission during the situation regarding the sale of the downtown central library and how it was flipped. So Doug, I'll bring your voice in first here. You know, I think my opinion has sort of come out with where I just went with that right now, but I'll probably tack on at the back end.
So my first reaction when I saw this story was that it's probably good for everyone involved. I think it's obviously Ron Dunn has a new job. He sought this job. So that's good news for him. He got what he wanted. He's going to a new opportunity in Halifax. I also think it's good for the city. For some of the reasons that you stated, there has been a lot of controversy and a lot of conflict, which is probably not the best thing to have between the city and one of the major providers of services to people experiencing homelessness. And I think ultimately this is good for the mission. I don't know how deep we want to get into our sort of post-mortem of the Ron Dunn era. It's just about finished here, but you know, you can't ignore the fundraising growth. You can't ignore that Ron Dunn brought something to the mission that it hadn't had before, which was you know, a facility with fundraising and ability to bring more money into the organization that than it had ever seen before. The flip side of that, I think, and you know, it's always difficult to criticize, I think, a volunteer board of directors, but I felt that Dunn, you know, needed more of a firm hand to direct him to the ways where he could be most useful to the organization and to the community. I think he would have made an awesome fundraising director for the mission. I'm not so sure that that having the role of actually steering the direction and determining programming was the right role for Dunn. And, you know, I think that there's been a lot of creep into places where it doesn't make a lot of sense for what is at the end of the day a homeless shelter. It didn't make a lot of sense for them to get into those things. And it you know, I think that criticism has been heard, that there has been empire building. You know, that's a criticism that was made of Mr. Dunn, and I think it's a fair one. So ultimately, I think this was you know, a missed opportunity to properly align the skills and talents of a person with the role, and for that I have to put at the feet of the, you know, the organization's leadership, which would be the board of directors. So all in all, I think it's a good thing, and I think there's an opportunity for the mission to think about now what it wants from a new executive director, what it wants to be in this community, and how it can go about repairing the relationships that were damaged over the past few years.
Yes.
You want me to jump in here? Sure, I'll do that. Diplomatic, Doug. No, I agree that I think it represents an opportunity, and in that sense, it's, as far as I'm concerned, a really good opportunity. The timing is interesting, and I think very challenging times ahead. I don't quite think the chapter on the Ron Dunn era is quite ending until there's been a transition, and we'll see what I think when there is a transition into new leadership, they're going to have to take stock and stake, and there may be more news later, and certainly there may be reaction and response to you know, what was done well and what wasn't done well, and in the whole picture, where the strategy is and what role they play in addressing issues of homelessness in our community. And they're certainly not the only organization. And I think that was part of the issue, the ability to work with service providers and other organizations in this community, and the community at large was a very major flaw, as far as I'm concerned, in the approach that Ron Dunn had in his style of leadership for the mission. So I don't think anybody who listens to the show is going to be surprised that I personally think this is good news for the mission, for the community, for that organization, but frankly, most importantly, for those that need the services that the mission did provide, a reexamination of the services they should provide. I do have to say I have concerns because there were plans, and then there were plans, and then there were different plans, and there were fundraising opportunities with different plans. But we are left at this particular point not knowing where even the mission is going to go physically as a location in providing some of its key services. And so there's a lot of work ahead with that board. I would say that obviously they're going to have to put an interim CEO in there. And I assume that person's going to be internal. But I think that that board should really consider how they're going to go about approaching the next person they want in that position. I would definitely say that that person should not be internal. There's been, Ron Dunn has been there long enough that anyone there would have seen a particular style. And I say this, respectfully to anybody who's there, I don't even know, but this is an opportunity for a fresh set of eyes, a fresh perspective coming in. And I agree with Doug that a lot of the work has to be done by the board in terms of what is the mission of the mission? Who does the mission serve? What role does it play in our community? And ultimately, what is their strategy to address the issues that they have chosen to participate in as, a valuable part of meeting the needs in our community. I think those are really, really important. What is their mission? What is their vision? What is the strategy, and where in the grand picture does that fit? And can you work with the rest of the community? And where are you going to go?
Yeah, I think those are, excuse me, I think those are good points, Pat. I just wanted to build and maybe talk a little bit about Mr. Dunn's departure. It does seem, it's obviously, it comes as a shock, I think, to most people in the community. I don't know how much of a shock it came to the board of directors at the mission. Mr. Dunn's comments on social media, I think, really highlight some of the challenges that his style has created for the mission. His Facebook post announcing that he was leaving the mission, there was a whole lot of stuff in there. But one of the things that really jumped out at me, partly because I think it's probably somewhat directed at one of the people on this panel, was, a comment about his haters and inviting the haters to have at it and have one last kick in the comments. I think
Classy.
that, well, not very classy at all, right? I think that being a leader means that you need to be willing to engage in conflict when conflict is necessary. It means that you need to be willing to stand up for your organization and for the people that you serve. But I think that comment, to me, crystallized some of the stuff that has created problems for the mission, that Ron Dunn has done that created problems for the mission. It's not about you, man. And if you have critics, engage your critics. If you feel that you're doing great things and that that you're being unfairly criticized, talk about the things you're doing, articulate and explain your positions. But to just take shots at people from a position of leadership in the community is not very classy and not very good leadership, in my opinion.
You want to be more specific, Doug? Who do you think it was aimed at?
Well, well, Pat, I
So
think if there is an RCP dartboard, I'm pretty
Uh-huh.
sure that in Ron Dunn's basement, I'm pretty sure that your face has the most holes in it.
Well, I won't charge him rent. He'll probably be our first download. So how about that? So there we go. I don't know how often he listens to our show, but I have a feeling. Hi, Don. Hi, Don. Hi, Ron. I see the comment in John's notes here. He wrote, "To my critics, it's okay. Take your last kicks in the comment section. The comment section is where your activism ends." And here's a so if he was speaking to me, let me speak back. I had the real pleasure, and I really mean that, of hearing a fellow by the name of Ian De Jong, and there's probably others in our community and certainly in the sector who know that name, and he wrote the book, and frankly it's called The Book on Ending Homelessness, so you can't really misinterpret that title. And I had the pleasure of hearing him speak at the OBIA, and that's the Ontario Association of Business Improvement Associations conference a couple of weeks ago in Hamilton, Ontario. And it was like I wanted to like just stand up and giving a standing ovation and just clap every few minutes of him speaking. He just really spoke to the concerns and the issues that I have felt around the way that this particular organization under Ron Dunn's leadership has conducted itself and where it's gone. The role of he started off really about the role of charities and religious charities, indeed, in this really big issue that we have in all of our communities, and by the way, all cities, everywhere, being homelessness. So, I'm hoping that we can bring him here. I would like to do that at a time that we can have this conversation as a community, because I think that while there is a board that is responsible ultimately and accountable for the hiring of a new CEO at the mission, I think that if they truly want to see a change, then this is the time to engage the community. So I'm going back to the responsibility of the board, but also the approach that the board can take. In other words, bringing on members of the community that perhaps in different parts of the service sector, if you will, that was not particularly worked with cooperatively and collaboratively under Ron Dunn's leadership. And here's a great opportunity, even on a hiring committee, certainly a process on the type of leadership that is needed there. In other words, engaging others in what is it that we need to see in the leadership of the mission going forward. And here's a really good example of bringing in the experts. We do not live in isolation. There are communities that have faced this, and there are strategies. I mean, homeless housing first, for example, the way that data is collected, what I heard from that particular speaker is, to listen to those that lead those organizations and listen carefully to the types of things that they say, and the types of things that they're not saying. And of course, in my own direct experience, I related it all back to our own community, and in particular, what was happening at the mission. So, questions about, who have we helped? And how have we helped? And, instead of how many showers and how many meals and the numbers of beds tonight and the growing numbers, right? Instead of reducing the numbers and how long were they and how often did they come back? I think there's just so much for us to learn. And it doesn't have to, there are people within our own community that have been saying it for a while, but now is a really, really good opportunity. Do I care that Ron Dunn wants to express himself this way on his way out? Only as much as I care of how far away his next job is, no, I don't. And frankly, this might be mean, but I guess I don't intend to be mean, and it's never been personal with Ron, except for the fact that his attitude and the way and the manner in which he led that organization had significant impacts in our community. And there's a great responsibility that came with that he never wanted to accept. And I don't think you can accept one without the other. So it's really interesting. Good luck to him in Halifax, and very best of luck to the mission in the opportunity that's ahead of them now.
It's weird, the connection now that the Windsor Public Library, that building, has looming over our politics. That's happened for a long while now, obviously going back a decade now, with Councillor Magny, former Councillor Magny, and then CEO, was it Barry Holmes, and the issues that erupted there. Obviously, unscrupulous actions that led to very unwanted outcomes, not only by council and administration, but citizens alike. And I think with this issue here, it's the same type of an outcome. We've lost our central public library in a deal that was supposed to see it become a community resource, a homelessness hub. And the mission flipped it under Dunn's leadership. And it left administration and council and the community alike upset with what the outcome of that was. Again, sort of an unscrupulous action, at least as defined not by that word specifically, but in that same sentiment by members of council, the mayor. And now, much like Barry Holmes, after how that situation happened, wiped off the chessboard and just, went to a different municipality. I don't think anyone really knows where Barry Holmes actually ended up. Ron Dunn is going to be able to leave this mess here and go off to somewhere else. And it's going to be up to Windsor to figure out, what are we going to be doing moving forward here? And, that's unfortunate. And we saw in this most recent release here that the Windsor Star put out, this article, sort of dropped in just casually at the end. Ron mentions that the pursuit of the McDougall Avenue location, completely dead in the water, not looking into it. And he just says, the drawings for site plan approval are going to go to the city at the end of this week. We'll see how it plays out, referencing the Olette and Victoria location that the mission owns, but said, we're only going to have to do it if it's a last resort. Negotiate with us right now. We demand it. And the community, of course, obviously came out very vocally saying that they didn't want it. So, I mean, great for Ron that he's not going to have to deal with the outcomes of his own actions here. I wouldn't want to have that stress, quite frankly. If you could grab a ticket and jump on a train and get out of Dodge, why not? The problem here, though, is going to be, how do we move forward with this? To submit these, just to find out that, it's been submitted. There's no more conversation about it publicly until it gets to council itself. It's just, what a way for Ron to leave the community with, in the exact way that has prompted all of the criticism. There's been nothing that's been learned. It's the same kind of, I'm going to bite my thumb at you attitude. And what are you going to do about it? I'm the one who knows what's right. And if you don't line up behind me, I'm going to railroad through you. So, I mean, it's not to say that the work of the mission, again, we've said this before, isn't important work and hasn't done good. But I feel a bit of empathy for the board and whoever this interim executive director is going to be, having to deal with this, quite frankly, this shit show.
Yeah,
I agree with you, John. I was going to say this. I agree with you in that he's leaving a mess behind. Now, the only thing that I can add to that is that it wouldn't matter. I mean, he might as well leave, because mess is what he would have left behind. Mess is what he would have continued to create, because the mess is all pointing back to Ron. And you're absolutely right. Like, if you remember, I mean, he was on our show. He talked about why he flipped the library. If you remember, the reason for the flip of the library was because he finally listened to the community, and the community told him that the shelter and the mission should not be on our main street, our largest main, what is considered our main street, Olette Avenue. And that there were these other plans. And now, again, sort of as a toss off at the bottom of an article, we find out that plan is gone nowhere. And I'm sure there's someone else to blame for that by Ron Dunn, not Ron Dunn. And then we have, this plan now that it's again on another location, where on our main street. So I guess, he needs to hear from the community again, but he won't, because he won't be here. And it's just a typical MO. I think, but on paper, it's going to be, he's leaving this organization with a plan. I mean, really, this is what it's going to be. He's leaving this organization with a plan, and somebody else will be to blame if they can't execute that plan.
That's why you need to source your news from more information than just the broadsheets, folks. Keep getting it from podcasts.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, and I think that's those are some good observations, Pat. I just wanted to add the hiring process for a executive director or CEO is not a brief one. So the Halifax Hospice, or the hospice in Halifax, has hired Ron Dunn. And, his start date is presumably sometime in November. He's leaving, his job at the mission on November 5th. I wonder, when did he apply for that job? Like when did the interviews happen? How long did this process take to play out? And the point that I'm making is, it may seem an inopportune moment now. I think that there's some good points made about exactly what is still undone, but it was probably 5-6 months ago that the initial application and conversation started to happen. So I just think that it's interesting to think about how long this hiring process has been going on, and to kind of map that to the timeline of Ron Dunn's interactions with the community and his actions in the community, and think about what may have been on his mind. And I wonder whether Halifax was his first attempt to get out of town.
And whether Jebsy's also going to Halifax.
Yeah, that's we can.
I'm going to take it back for a moment to that speaker that I was telling you about, Ian DeJong, and at the end of the day, I just remembered that somebody had it on social media. What expressions do you hate? And I think I've mentioned all of them just because they're on my brain. At the end of the day, so these are. The mission is part of a network of broader community supports for very complex social issues, And this cowboy strut of a CEO who had this great responsibility, and of course it's religiously based as well. So that was that element coming in. And, it's very hard. We've talked about this before on the show, to criticize at what is essentially a charity, and a lot of people working within, working with very good intentions, with compassion, and for very good reasons, to try to meet some of the challenges that we have, and for folks experiencing homelessness in our community. And yet, and it's a very difficult thing to hear, but I really enjoyed hearing it, because somebody's got to say it, and it deserves to be heard, that, charities have never solved these complex social issues. They might be an immediate response. We can offer food, and we can offer emergency shelter, and we can, find ways to get clothes and things to people. But these are not part of the solutions to these complex issues. For sure, governments are involved in these, and other agencies, mostly funded by government, and experts. There was an analogy that if we wanted to build a bridge, we might go into the community and say to the community and ask the community to consult on certain questions, but we wouldn't ask them how to actually build the bridge or design the bridge, right? There are experts in the community. And whether those experts are sitting on the board or hired or paid internally by the mission, there are experts that can be brought in as part of a network of understanding the proper role of this particular organization at this time now. And but by that, I mean in 2021, transitioning out of a pandemic, in that growth period that you mentioned so well, sort of in that synopsis at the start of it, John, the growth of and the change really in direction. Almost, I definitely often called it the moving away from the mission of the mission. And this is a really, really good time for them to take stock and see where they belong. But I agree with you, Doug. I mean, I think that they either knew or had a heads up, or certainly if they didn't, that's unfortunate because it's a very quick departure in this sense that it's at a very, very critical time. And I guess any time is a critical time, but most importantly now, because when is it that they have to be out of that building? Does anybody remember that?
The library itself?
No, not the library.
Or sorry, the on Victoria?
Yeah.
July of next year.
This is not a long period of time. I mean, even to suggest that it could go to, and I think there are going to be, that we can talk about that. We're not here to talk about the sort of the viability or the advisability of that particular location. But even if we were to say you've got some land and you can build and go tomorrow, that's a really hard, fast deadline. So Doug's right. I agree. There's some really challenging times and some hard decisions that will have to be looked at by the organization's leadership. And ultimately, that's the board.
Just to wrap this one up before we move on, to give listeners a bit of a timeline here, just been putting it together. On March 29th, the McDougall Street location was axed, according to CBC Windsor. We've obviously been in limbo waiting for an update on this. There was a posting for the job in Halifax in July, on July 5th. But the one that really stands out for me about this is right before that, or right around then, July 12th is when the city announced that they'd be building their new emergency shelter and housing hub. So within 11 days of the posting date of the Halifax CEO job, there was the announcement that the city would be arguably taking over some of these responsibilities. And now we know that Ron Dunn was applying during the same period here. So I guess that's the bow on top of this. And I think you're right, Pat. We're definitely not out of the woods here yet with the Ron Dunn tenure, his administration, and I think we'll still be learning a bit more about it even after he is gone as well. But absent anything from anyone else here, I think we're good to move on.
Yep.
Good. We will now be talking about, what a fun topic, online city council ward meetings are resuming. We had a weird format last year. We can just talk through this one with the phone calls and the surveys and the questions that were only asked to certain wards and not to other wards about the mega hospital issue. Obviously, we talked about this last year at the time. It's nice to see that the city will be resuming ward meetings, albeit online because of pandemic restrictions. For those of you listening right now who live in Ward 5, you missed out. Sorry. The ward meeting happened 2 hours ago at 6 o'clock with Councillor Ed Sleeman and Mayor Dilkins taking part with administration as well, all being done via Zoom. Upcoming meetings, the 19th is with Councillor McKenzie, 20th with Kashak, 21st with Morrison. Doesn't indicate whether or not the mayor will be taking part in the upcoming meetings. So I guess, that's my first question with these ones. Do you think the mayor is going to be taking part in all of these ward meetings? Is it a matter where, you request his presence? Could a councillor say like, no, I don't want you here for this specific one? Or are these ones arranged, directly with him? It's all still so new with it being taking part on Zoom.
Yeah, it's a good question. So firstly, I wonder who will be helping Councillor Sleeman facilitate his participation on Zoom tonight. Perhaps someone who attended that meeting can ask. I certainly would be an interesting resident question, but moving away from that, I'm so glad that the format from last year for ward meetings appears to be dead. I know you guys said I was diplomatic earlier. I'm not going to be diplomatic about this one. Those ward meetings were a joke. They were, you know, a very poor example of community consultation. I participated in the Ward 1 and 10 ward meeting. You know, I've participated in a number of ward meetings over the years when they were held in person, and it was no replacement at all for the public ward meetings. You know, this kind of thing is always going to be stage managed to some extent. These are politicians. This is a political event. They are engaging with you know, the electors who got them there. So you're never going to get away from that. And there's certainly a bit of stage management at the in-person ward meetings, but the telephone town halls were terrible. Loaded questions in the survey. You know, very, I gotta believe, careful screening of who was allowed to ask a question and what questions would be asked. You know, I don't think it's too far of a stretch to imagine that there were probably some questions planted at those ward meetings, which is all very different from the kind of thing that you see when you have an in-person meeting where constituents get to look and see and be there together. And it's really, really hard to actually control the direction of those. You know, I was at a ward meeting a few years ago with Councillor Francis, and the best questions, the most insightful and interesting questions were the ones that were shouted from the audience. You know, and Councillor Francis had to, and to his credit, did attempt to address those questions and those challenges. There was no way you were going to see that on a telephone town hall style ward meeting. So my hope is that these Zoom events will get a little bit more of a flavor of that type of interaction. I could go on for a long time about this, so I'm gonna finish my comments and just say one thing. Ward meetings, even the best ward meetings, are not sufficient community consultation. Windsor needs to really take a hard look at what the 21st century methods for engaging with the community in a meaningful way on the issues that matter. Windsor needs to look at that, and Windsor needs to do better. Ward meetings are valuable and we should have them, but they are not enough.
Yeah, most definitely about that.
I agree with the last part, Doug. You know, it's really interesting. I mean, first of all, let's be clear. They're not consultations for this reason at all. And that's because they're political. And the reason we know they're political is because we divide them up by ward, as if there's something magical about the boundaries around a ward. And even the fact that, you know, you know, you got your counselor there, whether you have the mayor or not, I think is an interesting question. And yet, why, you know, so it's this artificial territory or region that has not coincidentally been aligned with the political boundary, which is not necessarily a particular issue that is in an area that might cross boundaries and all sorts of things like that. So it's very, very much a political meeting or a political exercise in some cases. And there now, I'm less optimistic actually that it's going to be that much better than the phone calls. And correct me if I'm wrong. I hope my memory is not failing me that much. But weren't the phone calls also followed up by dial or press 1 if you you know, are in favor of the mega hospital, and press 2 if you think the mega hospital is a good idea?
Yes.
Like things like that.
Yes.
Okay. So, you know, that was part of the criticism, I think, of the egregious part of the criticism of the phone call strategy or method last year. That probably won't happen here. So that's one good thing. But, you, as everyone who uses Zoom, and we're using Zoom as a platform right now, knows that, depending on how you administer and set up that call, you can certainly do it in a way that no one who's asking a question can be seen. It might be directly through chat. It might be done where the others actually can't see the question, so somebody is moderating. There's all sorts of ways, and it'll be interesting to see how they actually set it up and whether the setup is consistent across the wards, or whether it is that the counselors themselves will say, this is sort of the way that I would like to do it. I think there's always some kind of stage management that has to happen, whether it's in a physical space in terms of setting that up, and whether you're bringing, sometimes there's drawings and maps that may need to be brought in for whatever reason, or, depending on how engaging you want to be, whether there's any exercises or activities. And I know we necessarily haven't done that in Windsor, but there are things that need to be stage managed. And I think that that's probably true, whether it's Counselor Sleeman or any other counselor, unless you've got a lot of experience sort of managing your own, somebody may need to be there. And who is that who would say, oh, we have a question, and read out the question to the counselor? I don't know that it's in the skill set, and necessarily that everyone should have a certain level of technical skill set to necessarily run and respond to meetings. But obviously the ward counselor is sort of the center of the ward meeting, because it's a ward meeting, and then you've got the support of administration. So it'll be interesting to see whether you see administration, whether administration responds to questions, and it'll be interesting to see all of that. I think you're right that it'll be better than the phone calls. But you're right, nothing replaces the in-person, because there's a dynamic there, like any other show, if you will, but that being present in a live, whether it's a concert or whether it's a play, this is very, very, a live jury trial. Like, there's something very different about in-person and live, and the dynamic that may happen that you will not get, depending on the parameters of how they set that up.
It's very, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. I just wanted to respond to Pat, because it's a really good point, that energy in the room can really help make people feel like they're on the right page, that they, someone who's got this comment or question in the back of their mind, and then they kind of feel the mood of the room, and it gives them emboldens them to be able to do that. Really hard to capture that in an electronic meeting. And I think that the missing ingredient, in any kind of electronic format, is the accountability piece. Ward meetings are about, answering questions and presenting the state of the community and whatnot. But there's an element of the residents of a ward holding their elected representative to account in a very personal and visceral way that I just don't think is going to be there in a Zoom meeting.
And which is why I think that's a really good point at the end. I think that if anything, it's mostly about accountability back to the electors and to your community, to really your electors by ward, which is very different than any other kind of consultation on a particular issue. I think it's again more political than that.
It's really hard to stage manage a public event where people can show up and walk in the room. You can't block them. You can't siphon the people you want off over to the approved list of questioners. You can't, I wouldn't say that anyone was removed from a Zoom call, but you certainly can't just drag someone out of a public venue the way that you could, automatically disconnect a Zoom if, you didn't want someone to necessarily be talking. Just looking back though, the telephone town halls last year, there were only 5 of them. So they grouped them together with 2 wards, which was already BS, followed up by the teletype thing, and came across in the archives here. John West from November of last year wrote a letter to the editor complaining about the format last year, saying that the mayor just read a prepared script of all of his accomplishments. It was clearly just an opportunity for these representatives to bask in their own words. So, I think the Zoom format will be better than the phone format, but it leaves a lot to still be wanted from that actual face-to-face, where you stand in a room and you ask the question. You've got the room with you. They're either on your side, they're not on your side. It doesn't really matter. But you're challenging the counselor there. Just say the bullshit straight to my face. Say the bullshit to everyone in this room, and take the risk that the media here are going to come up to me afterwards to ask me my opinion about it and then follow up with you. And that's all very different than a nice stage managed production that can be done via phone or that can be done via Zoom. So, for many reasons, let's hope that this pandemic ends sooner than later. But here we are still talking.
Well, I do think I just want to add with that actually is a really important piece, and not to suggest that people should be going in person to ward meetings and not have a sense of decorum. But there's there's no way that you could, especially if you can't see or hear the participants at that meeting, the level of support that a question may actually have, or the reaction to the answer, which you can sense that from the room. Everything from applause for a question, applause for the answer, whatever it happens to be. There is no sense of that in these online meetings because of the way that it's actually structured. But you also can't tell the importance of one question in terms of the minds of those that are there, because there's no reaction to it. So a question is a question is a question, and you can't really tell which one would be a priority question for those people that are there versus, this one happened to be the second one that was posted, so let's go with that one. And that changes the dynamic of how one senses the importance of issues, both to the community and possibly even to the elected representative or the ward councillor who's there.
Yep. These are excellent points,
agreed.
Pat. Yep.
Okay, well, let's get on to our last topic. We drew straws. We will be talking about Lakeshore Council discussing potential regional transit plans. Windsor Star put this one out at council. Lakeshore's council voted to develop a business case for linking with Windsor and Tecumseh via regional transit. Administration had made the recommendation to develop the business case, and Lakeshore Mayor's Tom Bain says there is huge demand and that there always has been. Lakeshore hired a consulting firm to study the appetite of Lakeshore residents and concluded that there is strong travel demand between Lakeshore and Windsor. 82 responded to the survey. Wards 1 and 2 councillors oppose the plan. They oppose the costs. And the Ward 2 councillor put it pretty bluntly, saying, people move to Lakeshore knowing that there's no bus service here. So, we don't need it. But Ward 3 councillor Kelsey Santarosa has said that the Youth Advisory Council has been touting the importance of transit service since at least 2008. Now, municipal staff has recommended council endorse a 1A route between Bell River and Tecumseh Mall, annual operating costs as high as roughly $2 million. Models proposed included $2 and $3 fares. Both would run a deficit, but administration was clear, sorry for the redundancy, that transit services are not intended to run with surpluses, as they are services to be provided to the community. As for regional transportation, there would obviously need to be a buy-in from both Windsor and Tecumseh. Transit Windsor has previously stated an interest in expanding to Lakeshore and to Tecumseh. So quick timeline here as to where things stand with regional transit rollouts. 2017, the Windsor-LaSalle line resumed for the first time since the 1970s. In 2019, a pilot project was launched between Windsor and Leamington. Currently, there are negotiations between Windsor and Amherstburg, and if approved, the Lakeshore 1A route would be launched in 2024. And if Amherstburg moves forward, we're looking here at, a pretty strong regional transit network foundation to continue to be built upon. I don't think there's anyone here in Windsor proper that would be opposed to further developing a regional transit network. It helps to lessen the burden that Windsor taxpayers pay directly for Transit Windsor by bringing on more user fees, by bringing on a larger tax base to subsidize the route overall. But I will ask the two of you, because I heard when I showed up late for the pre-show banter that we do, you were both analyzing this one here. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are just on the politics of this, and why maybe certain councillors are looking one way and others might be looking the other way.
Well, when we were discussing this, I went ahead and pulled out a ward map, because it's always useful to try to figure out where the different interests might lie. Kelsey Santa Rosa is the councillor for Ward 3, which is the urban center of Lakeshore. So it is not surprising at all that Ms. Santa Rosa would be advocating for better transit service. Residents of her ward would presumably stand to benefit the most. And it's not surprising that the wards 1 and 2, and particularly the Ward 1 councillor, would be skeptical because Ward 1 is the westernmost ward in Lakeshore. It butts right on to Manning Road, and is a pretty high income portion of that community. So for both those reasons, residents of Ward 1 probably wouldn't benefit as much. So that's a superficial analysis, I guess, of the politics of it. On the substance, I think it would be good to have more regional transit, more regional links. One of the things that we have learned in recent years is that it is a barrier to employment for people to not be able to reach the locations where the jobs are, whether they live in Windsor and there are jobs they would like to be able to do in the county, but there's no transit service, or vice versa. That's been something that is a drain on the regional economy, in that we have jobs that lack people and people that lack jobs, and transit is one of the things that could be a resolution. And I think on that note, I think it's interesting how rarely we look at issues like this through a lens of how would it improve the community beyond benefiting the people who would sit in the seats on the bus, and costing people X amount of dollars on their tax bill. I think regional transit is something that could really do a lot to improve the quality of life and economic performance of our community. I wish that we had some better forum for regional cooperation, so that these things didn't have to happen piecemeal. It's really, you mentioned that it was 2017. So it's been 4 years since the transit service resumed to LaSalle. And this is something that wouldn't even start until 2024. So, even if this were to continue and there would continue to be new routes added connecting Windsor to municipalities in the county, you're talking about a 20, 25, 30-year project to get everything all said and done. The problems are now. And it would be way better if we didn't have to spend so much time in negotiation and deliberation on each individual route. And maybe municipalities would feel more comfortable signing on to a deal like this if they knew there was consensus among their peer municipalities that they were also going to get on board and improve the value of the service to their residents.
Agreed. And I can't speak to the cost issues, but certainly that would also have an impact on the how cost is shared and what that would look like. What's really interesting to me on the side of the different counselors having different views and possibly where they're situated and the demographics that they might be representing is also, it comes back to, we've said it before when we mostly talk about the city of Windsor, and that is a municipality. And since we were talking about ward meetings, it's worth repeating here that, we often sometimes think, who does a ward council represent and how should one go about making decisions? And are they elected as a counselor of the municipality to be making decisions, all things considered, in the interest of the municipality? And so it's not my neighborhood or your neighborhood overall. And that's some of the things that we often see in Windsor City Council. And we certainly enjoy it on this show for, because it makes a good show, but really overall, there are some real issues around that type of thinking. I wouldn't be surprised that Kelsey Santa Rosa would also be in favor of this for other reasons. She's certainly a young counselor. I think younger folks have, and I don't know specifically, but I'm just going to guess here, much more aware of issues of prominence in our net here and now, issues of climate change. So you take somebody that's in an affluent neighborhood and you're saying, well, my folks don't need bus service here, but what is that really saying? Because what if, this person has kids that one goes to the university and one goes to the college? So we already have 2 cars. We're going to add 2 more cars so that they can get to the college in our community and the university if that's where they choose to go. So it's about jobs, but it's also about other needs in getting and seeing transit as a viable alternative to cars, both because of need, but not just because of need, but because of want and changing lifestyles and what that might look like and the impact that we have on climate change in our community and all the big picture stuff. So for sure, regional transit is something we should be looking at just because it's a good thing. And then we start from there and how do we make it happen? So I agree with you, Doug, that there are better ways to make it happen. This is going to be an interesting one here. The last thing I'm going to say for those that listen and know that I have one particular issue always on the mind is I'm wondering how that counselor who thinks that the folks that moved there to Lakeshore knowing there is no bus service, whether that counselor is in favor of the new mega hospital site. And I wonder whether when they moved there, did they know that there would be no hospital around the corner? I'm just questioning that. But yeah.
It's a very good point, Pat. And I think we'll probably just leave it there. I have nothing better that I could add to top that off. So we'll leave that as the cherry on top. We have decided to nix our other segment tonight. So if you're upset, just think about what we would have said about mandatory vaccinations for first responders. You can probably come to the same outcome that we would have gotten to on air. So don't worry about that. This has been a really fun episode. We really dove into deep into some topics here. We tore it apart. We cut through it with a knife. We analyzed it from all different perspectives and tried to at least provide all of you listening here with 3, distinct takes on it, I guess, quasi distinct. We tend to overlap like a Venn diagram at times, but that's okay. We will be back next week, though, with an all new issue. But first, before I get into the outro, wanted to bring Doug's voice in for our award-winning fan favorite segment. We have been getting awards from our fans in our DMs. Feel free to slide in there and let us know what other awards we deserve to win. Doug, what is up for our consideration?
Thanks, John. This is a really important segment to me because it's the one where I get to ride my hobby horse, and nobody gets to shoot down the things that I want to talk about in our pre-show. So this week, I wanted to direct everyone's attention to the Canadian Media Concentration Research Project. And the reason that I wanted to do that is that there is an increasing amount of buzz and noise. You see it on social media, you see it elsewhere about quote unquote saving local news. There is a new Twitter account that I think is called the Media Action Plan that is consistently pushing on issues around media and pushing on the government for policy around essentially the approach that those folks are taking is that the the internet giants, Facebook, Google, and so forth, are stealing advertising revenue from the kind-hearted apple pie eating media corporations in Canada. And I simply want to bring people's attention to this organization and their 2020 report. Maybe my colleagues will indulge me and allow me to tweet that from the Rose City Politics account. But they take a look at the media landscape in Canada through a different lens, which I think is a really important one. And that is through the lens of how concentrated is media ownership in Canada. And I just want to give you a couple of tidbits to get you thinking and maybe encourage you to dive into this report. The top 5 Canadian companies, Bell, TELUS, Rogers, Shaw, and Quebecor, accounted for 72.5% of network media economy revenue last year. Okay. That contrasts with the internet giants' combined revenue in Canada of around $9.3 billion. But is it healthy for our democracy to have the vast majority of the news and information that people consume be delivered by outlets that are owned by 5 companies? Is that something that is corrosive to democracy in our country? Is that something that's beneficial to democracy in our country? I would love to see a far more robust conversation about the media landscape and what policy approaches government should take to address it. And keep in mind, when you are seeing these arguments and these messages on social media, you have interested parties feeding you a simplified version of events and of the landscape that is suited to their argument. There's a lot more to think about and discuss here. We'll share the link, and thanks to my colleagues for letting me get on my hobby horse.
Hey, it's a good one. You know that the issue of the state of media is one that's near and dear to all of our hearts here, Doug. Love that you're the kind of person to spend your days and your free time, analyzing it. It's what makes you you.
Thanks.
Thank you. No, yeah, no, it's a true thanks. And it'd be interesting to do a Patreon on the report as well and do a deeper dive into that. So slide into our DMs and remind us to do that. If you've been listening tonight, though, thank you so much. We appreciate you're sticking with us for the past hour there. A really fun episode, as I said. It's October the 13th. Our regular panel tonight included Doug Sartori, Pat Papadeus, and myself, John Lidke. Please do support us at patreon.com/Rose City Politics. As we mentioned, we are in BizX Magazine and online at bizxmagazine.com. Brand new article that's going to be dropping soon next month about the Festival Plaza upgrade and delay. We're on all your favorite social media sites. Like, share, and subscribe. We are on your podcasting apps, and Rose City Politics has been able to broadcast live on tape thanks to the kind support of LiUNA 625, Building Better Communities. We will be back next week, October 20th. It'll be a full Halloween no, it won't, but maybe there'll be some spooky stuff going on in the city that we'll talk about. Who knows? We'll be back next week. See you then, folks.
Okay, bye-bye.